Alex, what's going on with the world and the Trump administration with the tariffs and the way that they're trying to manage the situation between, I would say, between the United States and China. And here is what this Treasury Secretary of the United States, Scott Bessent, said about the war between the United States, this economic war between the United States and China.
Escalation, unfortunately, the biggest offender in the global trading system is China, and they're the only country who's escalated. And I can tell the rest of the world that I'm not sure whether it was the prime minister or the economic minister in Spain made some comments this morning. Oh, well, maybe we should align ourselves more with China. That would be cutting your own throat, because I can tell you that these Chinese exports that the U.S. tariff wall is going to keep out, that China, for all of you who can remember that Disney movie of the brooms carrying the buckets of water, that is a Chinese business model. It never stops. They just keep producing and producing and dumping, and it's going somewhere. And I think, Rob, at the end of the day, that we can probably reach a deal with our allies, with the other countries that have been long-term. They've been good military allies, not perfect economic allies, and then we can approach China as a group.
And he's referring, Alex, to the movie in 1940 in Disney. And you remember that was a huge.
I remember the scene that he was talking about. Yes. Look, Nima, it seems to me, the whole thing seems to me a little bit silly. I think they launched into a bluff. The Chinese called them and doubled down, and they didn't expect this. And so now they need to find a face-saving way of backpedaling from this situation. And now they're talking about maybe, if we all unite against China, then maybe we can browbeat them. We can force them to our point of view, and we can force them to capitulate to us. But it doesn't look very realistic at this point, and it makes the administration look weak. Look, some of what he's saying is true. China has been, how do you call it, a currency manipulator for many, many years. They have set themselves at an advantage with vis-a-vis other trading nations, especially the United States. They have attracted a lot of American manufacturing to China. They have deliberately tried to set up research and development centers in cooperation with Western corporations to learn from them, to poach the best R&D talent from Western corporations and all of this. Well, you could say that was abusive. You could also say that it's a legitimate rivalry. It's legitimate business competition. May the best man win. And in most of these endeavors, China wins. They have done a better job. Now, why has all this happened? We have to go back to 1971 when Richard Nixon severed the convertibility of the dollar to gold. And, from that moment on, they knew, the people in power. I'm not talking about Nixon or Kissinger. I'm talking about the people actually in power who are dwellers of Wall Street and the city of London. They knew that they were going to destroy the dollar. That it was only a matter of time, because the dollar at that point became a fiat currency backed by nothing. So if you destroy a country's currency, which was only a matter of time, then that means that you destroy, the empire loses its most powerful the most powerful enforcer of the empire, which was the United States, with all its military bases around the world, with all these carrier strike groups going around the world, making sure that everybody is subordinate to the empire. And they knew at that point that they would, down the road, need a new global cup, right? And they designated China as that new global cup. And almost immediately after after ending the convertibility of dollar, Nixon and Kissinger made overtures to China to open it up. And from that point on, Western financial and corporate giants went to China, uh, worked with the Chinese governments to open China up and to build it up into the global superpower. And if you read the statements by people like Henry Kissinger and George Soros up until maybe 10, 15 years ago, they were all explicitly saying that China was going to own the globalization process, that China was going to be the model society on which all other nations are going um, to model their own governance systems. And so they clearly saw China as the next global cup, as the next superpower that was going to take on the role of the United States in enforcing the global empire, of which China would be the enforcer, but they themselves, meaning the financial oligarchies of the West, would be the ultimate stakeholders, the ultimate beneficiaries. And so they set China up to be the winner in this global rivalry and competition. They made everything possible for China to do what it did. Even when back in the 1990s, many U.S. politicians were complaining about China being the currency manipulator. Uh, the powers that be let it stand. They didn't allow the United States to sanction China. They didn't allow a redress of these imbalances and grievances from the United States. And so we saw progressively that China was winning at this game, and that more and more manufacturers were setting up shop in China, and that the United States became this importer of everything China, which in a way worked out for the United States as well, because they benefited from the China price, meaning that the local the domestic monetary inflation didn't translate into a consumer price inflation, thanks to the fact that China was exporting cheap locally produced goods to the United States. Well, now obviously the United States has been brought to a point where it has to redress that, and there's willingness politically from the side of the Trump administration to actually go through with it. But it seems to me that they didn't think things through correctly. They didn't pace themselves. They gambled on running a bluff by China, and they gambled on the notion that the Chinese were going to find all this intimidating, and that they were going to find themselves in a superior negotiating positions. Well, that didn't happen. The Chinese called their bluff. They responded with reciprocal measures. And so now somebody has to climb back from this escalation. And it seems to me that for Trump and his team, this is particularly painful, because they don't like to admit that they have been wrong, that they have blundered. And so we'll see what happens. But obviously, uh, it is clear now that China is in a stronger position, economically, but also geopolitically. And then it's clear that China is closely coordinating their moves with Russia and with Iran. And I think that the Trump administration will have to, in one way or another, go back with a blank sheet of paper with their hat in their hand and say, "Hey, can we get along? Let's uh, let's try to do this so everybody is happy."
Do you see that the main objective was China and all the other tariffs on other countries were just a sideshow for what they were doing, or they really meant the way that they were putting tariffs on each and every country on this planet?
You see, I'm not even sure, Nima. It appears to be this way. But, China is a unified sovereign country with which Donald Trump should be able to make deals, negotiate, discuss, and come to an understanding. On the other hand, you have the European Union, and it seems to me that Trump is particularly keen on confronting the European Union and actually seeing the end of it. And the more I look, the more it seems to me that this is almost always part of the policy. Uh, you see, a lot of the bulk of European exports go to the United States and the UK, and much of these exports go to the United States via China because many European manufacturers outsource their production to China. They slap their brands on it. They say designed in Germany, designed in France, but it's made in China. And so that goes to China as well, effectively European exports. And so confronting China is an indirect way of also confronting Europe. And the tariffs that they slapped on European Union, he's been talking about this since early March. Actually, it's not something that happened on the Liberation Day. And then I also see that for some reason the U.S. dollar depreciated against the euro by not exactly 10%, but around 9%. So even with these sanctions paused, all of a sudden, in a space of a few weeks, we have the dollar, which is now trading at around €1. Euro, which is trading at $1.14, whereas about 3 weeks ago it was trading at $1.04. So just like that, all of the European exports to the United States became around 9% more expensive, whereas all the US exports going to Europe became 9% cheaper. And that's not even tariffs. When tariffs come into play, it's going to be even worse. And then there's the question of bombing of Yemen, which this wasn't your question, but I think it's related because I watched about a week ago. You had a panel discussion with Colonel Wilkerson, Chaz Freeman, and was it Ray McGovern?
Professor Marandi?
Oh yes, Professor Marandi. That's right. And I, ever since this Operation Rough Rider began in the middle of March, I thought this is so completely stupid. I cannot even imagine that they're doing this because they've been bombing Yemen for 10 years now. The Saudis have, the British have, the Israelis have, the Americans have. We had 16 months of this Operation Prosperity Guardian. They bombed and bombed and bombed and nothing happened. And now comes Trump with the Operation Rough Rider, and they bomb some more, and again nothing happens. And I thought, couldn't you have guessed after 10 years of bombing these Yemenis that nothing would happen, that you would not be able to achieve your objectives? Why are you doing this? Well, you remember Larry Wilkerson was talking about the tabletop exercise that they conducted with CENTCOM and AFRICOM and the Pentagon and a whole bunch of other American national security agencies and European national security agencies. And they came to the conclusion that the Red Sea was the quote unquote global hub of competitiveness. And this absolutely had to become a strategic focus for the Western powers. And that's when they started setting up their bases in Djibouti and created the AFRICOM and all of these things. So they obviously gave great importance to this trade route. And up until the 15th of March, this trade route was open to European trade. And since the beginning of the Operation Rough Rider, Red Sea has been closed to European trade. And the bulk of all the trade that goes through the Red Sea is Europe's trade. And that makes up, what did Larry Wilkerson say, 55 to 60% of all of the world's trade that goes through that, and most of it is Europe's. It's only 3% American trade that goes there. So this seems to me, whether by design or by accident, another way to kneecap Europe again. So we had the blow up of Nord Stream 2. That wasn't the Trump administration, but nevertheless, there's a certain continuity of U.S. policy there. Then we have the tariffs. Then we have the Ukraine war, which they've been completely cut out of the loop from that. Then we have American imposing 5% of the GDP for the defense spending. Now we have this Operation Rough Rider that interrupted Europe's trade through the Red Sea. And now we have this currency manipulation. Well, I think it's currency manipulation because it's not very often that a major currency changes valuation by so much in only 2 or 3 weeks' time. So whatever the reason is, it seems to me that Europe is maybe the main target of the Trump administration, because everything they do ends up making the situation for the Europeans worse.
When you talk about Europe, and we know that Spain right now is doing something, moving and talking with China. But how about the other countries? Do you think that they feel that their survival is at risk?
Which countries are you
Europe.
referring
I'm
to?
talking about Europe.
Europe.
Do they really feel that their survival is at risk right now? Because we know that if, as time goes by, the situation, the competition between the United States and China would worsen. It's not going to get better and improve. And what would be the position of Europe? As we saw, Besant said that they're gonna they're gonna cut your throat. And this is the way that the United States is not just talking about China; they're talking about themselves. If you go that way, we know how to deal with you. What is the way out for Europe? What is the solution for Europe?
Well, I think the first thing that's a solution is to get rid of Ursula von der Leyen and this whole European Commission. And I would take it a step further. I would say that the European Union, as it is constituted today, has to disintegrate. And I think that inevitably we are going in that direction. We've seen that the American administration, the Trump administration, is kind of supportive of all these sovereigntist movements in Europe. Marine Le Pen and AfD in Germany and Kalin Georgescu in Romania, and I think that they will be able. Oh, Giorgia Meloni in Italy, not to mention, and I think that the Americans would prefer to have good, constructive relationships with Germany, with France, with Britain, with Romania, with Poland, with each country individually of its own, rather than dealing with the European Commission and other structures of the European Union, which is, as it is, I think that they are completely lost, because for the last 10 years, they have been obsessed with net zero policies and Ukraine. They haven't thought about anything else, it doesn't seem. They are complete. This whole thing I just discussed about the war in the Red Sea, the United States bombing Yemen. I don't think that the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, Kaja Kallas, any of them, I don't think this even registered with them that this is a massive problem for Europe. I don't think that they know how to deal with the United States and with tariffs. They have the whole business model of Europe has been based on getting uninterrupted, abundant flows of cheap Russian energy and then exporting finished goods of European industries to the United States. And now, they cut off the flow of energy from Russia. And now the Trump administration is cutting off their access to the American markets. And they have no idea what to do, it doesn't seem to me. And so they are in a completely reactive mode. Tariffs. So we're going to respond with our own tariffs. That's about it. There is no plan B. The only plan that they have is investing into rearmament with a view of going to war against Russia at the end of this decade. And so now they're stumped. They don't know how to run an economic policy. And the monetary policy, all they have is printing money and more money and more money. And so it completely doesn't work. This is like an orchestra where nobody knows what they're supposed to be playing. Everybody is harping on their own instrument in whichever way they see fit, and the whole result is a mess and a jumble. It's completely directionless. And I think that there's a risk that we go into the kind of disintegration that we saw with the French Revolution, that we end up, in Germany, in Britain, in France, that we end up seeing a civil war, and that the transition to whatever comes next is going to be bloody and violent.
You mentioned Georgescu. Here is what he said with Tucker Carlson. Alex.
Everybody knows that was a foreign intervention, and particularly from Secretary of State Blinken, that he intervened in the elections and simply dictate what the system have to do. And it's absolutely, everybody knows about this situation, including, of course, President Macron and Maia Sandu from Moldova as well. They intervened. But the most important was Secretary of State Blinken.
What did he do and say that affected your election and Romanian politics?
Well, simply was an intervention. They don't, very clear, they don't need free Romania. To be mentioned that the largest military base of NATO is in Romania. Probably you know about that.
Yes.
And of course, they want to launch the World War III from Romania. And with this situation, of course, they can involve all Europe and also United States. So these, they have interest. They have interest in war.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing that he says that they want to start the World War III from Romania. Your take, Alex?
Well, that doesn't surprise me one bit, and in fact, I think he's completely right. This is a centuries-old obsession from Western powers to dominate the Eurasian landmass. And to dominate the Eurasian landmass, they absolutely cannot have rival hegemons there locally. So, powers like Russia, China, India, Iran, they have to be cut down to size. And so that's why they have this blind obsession with regime-changing Russia and partitioning it, which is what they have tried to do already in the 1990s when they had Boris Yeltsin there in power, Russia really came to the verge of disintegrating. Already, the individual republics of the Russian Federation were no longer paying revenues into the federal budget. The local governors were not obeying legal requests from Moscow, and this is what the West has deliberately created. And then, there's also the access to Russian natural resource wealth, which is considered to be the largest of any other country in the world, estimated between 75 and 90 trillion US dollars worth. So how do you take all this when you can't defeat Russia militarily? Already, more than a century ago, Halford Mackinder made his proposal, and he said that the pivot power, which we now know is Russia, would be surrounded by so many beachheads, all from from its western borders down south all the way to the Koreas. And Halford Mackinder named Italy, France, Egypt, India, and Korea as those beachheads. Of course, over the last 100 years, the geography has changed. So, now you have Israel in the Mediterranean, you have Ukraine, you have Romania, you have Georgia. It doesn't matter so much which country it is. What matters is that you dominate those countries and that you are able to leverage them to continually impose wars on the pivot power, i.e. on Russia, and to continuously weaken it with a view of eventually being able to destabilize it, regime change it, and then put your own kind of Boris Yeltsin or Juan Guaido or Boris Nemtsov or Alexei Navalny into the Kremlin, who is going to do what you tell them to do, like Zelensky is doing today in Kiev, what the British tell him to do. So then, if that happened, then you would be able to use Russia as a bludgeon against China in the same way that today they're using Ukraine as a bludgeon against Russia. And then all of the Russian military might, all of their weaponry, would become theirs to use against other regional hegemons, primarily against China, but then also you could use it against India, you could use it against Pakistan, you could use it against Iran, or whoever you choose. And so the obsession to take down Russia is not going to go away. Even when they run out of the last Ukrainian, they're going to try to use Romania and Moldova and Georgia and Poland and the Baltic states. And so, if along comes some Kalin Georgescu who says, hey, it's not in our interest to really go to war against Russia and to build this massive military base that makes us a target, it would be much, much better for us to actually have a constructive cooperation as a relationship with Russia and to trade with them, mutually beneficial trade. Obviously, this completely disables the plans of the Western powers, so they have to make sure that Kalin Georgescu never comes to power. Same with AfD in Germany, for the same reason. They also want to have constructive cooperation as the way to relate to Russia. Same with Marine Le Pen. She's been wobbling around a little bit, but her intent for a very long time has been to deal with Russia in a bilateral way that's good for France and good for Russia. And so the European powers now have to make sure that they prevent the popular pressures from bringing people to power who will simply say no to this march to war. And the popular will is to stop the march to war. there's no doubt about that. We see that in Hungary, we saw that in Germany. I think that German elections probably were rigged to some degree, so to make sure that Friedrich Merz got to form the next cabinet. We saw it in Ukraine. In Romania. We also saw it in Croatia, where the president of the country was lambasted in the media as a Putin puppet, and he ended up winning something between 70 and 75% of the popular vote. Well, that makes it very, very hard to kind of try to unite the continent and to orchestrate the next big war, which they are planning for, the turn of the decade on 2029, 2030. This is why they're using judges and lawfare to disable the real democracy in Europe. The conflict we are experiencing today is the conflict between two systems of governance. It's definitely a conflict between the European oligarchic system versus everybody else, independent nations, China, sovereign nations like Iran, China, Russia, Belarus. They want to take them all down, and I'm not convinced that the United States administration realizes this, or if they do, it's not apparent in what they say, in the way they act, because when it comes to Russia, they're no longer doing the bidding of the Western Empire. When it comes to Iran, they are doing the bidding of the Western Empire. So that seems incoherent. It seems contradictory. And I think that they will run into very, very stiff opposition. I would certainly expect that Witkoff will discuss Iran with the Russians, because what they have in common with the Russians is that neither the Russians nor the Americans want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. But, they have that in common with the Iranians themselves, because the Iranians don't want to have a nuclear weapon either. So that shouldn't be a problem. But it seems to me that there's a fairly strong political faction in the United States that is still daydreaming about using Israel to cement an undisputed hegemony over the Middle East by taking down Iran. So if they took down Iran, they think that, all right, then we and the Israelis, we completely dominate the region, and then it's going to be whatever we say, and we're going to be the new sheriff in town, and there's going to be a 1,000-year empire there that we're going to run. Even Steve Witkoff, in a way, has voiced those opinions. So are these head fakes, or do they actually mean it? I can't say, because I can't really decide whether the Trump administration have thought things through and they know what they're doing, or they know at least what they want to achieve there, or whether they're making it up as they go along. And it's not a trivial question, because if you start from the premise that they have thought things through, that they have a strategy, that they know what they want to achieve, then you can kind of guess what their logical policy should be, what the next step would be, why they're escalating against Yemen, why they're arranging all this arsenal to bring down on Iran. But if they're making it up as they go along, then anything is possible. They you can't guess where they're going with this. And so I think that, of course, Witkoff will try, and the Trump administration, they will try to get Russia to lean on the Iranians to give up their nuclear program, to give up their missiles, whatever they want them to do, to promise not to come to Iran's aid, to not supply them air defenses, radars, whatever Iran might need. But I very much doubt that this is going to have any effect, because again, if you help the Western Empire contain Iran, then you're going to help them strengthen, and they are still your enemy. You're gonna help an enemy win a very important battle in a very important region. So I very much doubt that the Russians and the Chinese are going to cooperate in this. So I think that the only thing that the Americans are going to find in Iran is a defeat. It's once more, Persia is going to be the graveyard of Western empires. I don't see a way that they can avoid that. And then, I'm kind of encouraged that Trump is engaged in indirect talks with the Iranians, and that he is not coordinating those talks with Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israelis, and that he said, if we take the military option, it's going to be led by the Israelis. Israelis are going to be the leaders on this, which means that Israelis are going to be responsible for the fallout and for all the consequences that might happen if they decide to try and attack the Iranians. So it's very difficult for me to say what the administration is doing, and I'm guessing. Do they have a strategy, or are they making it up as they go along? The fact that Trump speaks with Xi Jinping on the regular, and the fact that they speak with the Russians on the regular, to me is an encouragement, because if they are in over their heads, they're going to learn something about the new situation in the Western Asia, and the fact that Iran is not the same Iran that was there 30 years ago, that it has strong alliances with Russia and with China, that it has been designated by China as an anchor of the security architecture for Western Asia, and that it now has defensive and offensive weaponry against which neither the Americans nor the Israelis have obvious defenses.